All right, maybe let's start. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So this webinar is part of the Novembre Numérique organized by the Institut français of Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. And we thank them very much for creating this space to talk about the role of female creators and entrepreneurship in crowdfunding and vice versa. So we have really today the pleasure of having both the side of professionals, people who are creating those, who are working or helping the people creating on the platforms, and the side of the researcher. I think we'll have a really great conversation here to confront position and observation based on multiple countries, because we have two people here from France, one from Norway and one from Denmark, and I'm sure we'll have great conversation based on just comparing what happens in all of our countries. So we'll have today Cecilia Adam, who has been the director of CAP, an agency since 2015, and the goal of this agency is to help project leaders in crowdfunding, different type of crowdfunding, crowdlending, crowdfunding, equity-based also, and training those project leaders. Also from France, we have Alice Guillemet, who has a background in management of cultural project and engineering, and here will come talk to us based on her extended experience working for ProArty, which is a platform specializing in creative and artistic projects in France. We also have on the side of the researchers, Natalia Mael. I'm hoping I'm saying your name correctly. Please tell me if it's not the case.
More or less correctly.
Okay.
Natalia
Mael. So you're a professor at the Moen Center for Innovation and Regional Development for the Western Norwegian University of Applied Sciences. You are teaching and researching in the fields of digital innovation, sustainability, and marketing, and you are an expert on crowdfunding, and you've been involved in several international research projects on crowdfunding in Norway. And finally, we have Christian Rode Nielsen, same, I'm hoping it's more or less the right thing. And you're an associate professor at the Copenhagen Business School, and your research is at the intersection of sustainable consumer behavior and innovation, and you have done extended research on crowdfunding. So I'm very eager to hear all of your position on the diverse topics that we will be talking today. And maybe I will start the conversation by trying to understand what is the specificity of what a female creator is in the crowdfunding field. Do women have different behavior, have different profile from their male counterparts? I don't know if someone wants to talk this topic, and we'll start the conversation based on that. Everybody's shy. I don't know, maybe Natalia, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start the discussion. So yes, we usually when we discuss women and crowdfunding, so we usually kind of compare to the position of women in general in entrepreneurial finance. And traditionally, compared with males. Female entrepreneurs usually get disproportionately small amount of funding, at least from the traditional sources. And that's one of the reasons why many of them go to crowdfunding, because crowdfunding kind of can democratize this process and give possibilities for women to achieve higher success in receiving funding. And what we see is actually it is true that in crowdfunding, the success rate for women is usually higher than for males. It's partly because of the support from other women. So actually what research finds that many female backers support female entrepreneurs. And it's explained by this kind of feeling of solidarity, and also by the kind of language that female entrepreneurs use in their crowdfunding campaigns. What we find in the literature and the research is that female campaigners, they use more kind of emotional type of language, which can be also an advantage. It can be more appealing also to female backers, but in general to backers, because emotional appeals can be quite powerful.
Christian, maybe do you have similar findings in your research?
Yeah, okay. So I'll try to keep it short, as short as I can. So, I mean, obviously there has been quite a lot of research looking at female entrepreneurship, especially in the US context on Indiegogo and Kickstarter, which does suggest that women are more likely to get funding than men, which is quite unique in this kind of investment context. However, that is very sector specific and it's very country specific. So for example, if you look at Denmark, if you look at crowdfunding here and you look at the Danish platforms, women are actually not more likely to receive funding than men. And we do not observe that women are more likely to support other women. And I would say that at least this work by Greenberg and Mollick sounds very academic now, but basically what they suggest is that this notion that women support other women is quite sector specific. So you experience a high degree of activism in sectors where women are typically underrepresented. So it was the IT sector, for example, where you notice this kind of strong homophily or tendency to actively support other women, whereas other sectors, they don't observe that. And that is perhaps also why we don't observe it in a Danish context, because the platforms we have are not very IT specific. So I think what one has to be aware of is that depending on the platform, depending on the country, and depending on the sector, you may, as a female, experience better odds. Unfortunately, you may also experience worse odds. And it also depends whether reward. There seems to be pretty concise literature to suggest that there's a higher probability of success. It might also be because women ask for typically less than men. But there may, for example, in equity and lending, we don't observe these kind of positive effects. Often we observe the opposite, actually, that they are less likely to be successful. So we should be wary of this kind of rigid model of understanding. But it depends on the model, context, and sector.
Yeah, I assume there's a massive difference, but I think we see a massive difference in all type of research based on if we are talking about crowd lending, crowd equity, or donation based, because we see very different type of motivations. Also, people expect to get their money back when they lend, and so it's a very different type of investments, and maybe closer to what the financial market would be. And so maybe more men go there. So maybe based on the French professional sector, Alice, maybe do you have any ideas on this topic?
Yeah, of course. So to start, I just wanted to say that for us, it's really difficult to get data back from our website, because we don't ask creators if they're female or male, first of all, and same for backers. We don't know. But I tried it this morning, actually. I took the list of all the projects we advise this year, and it's half and half. So also it's very difficult for me, I suppose, because we accompany teams of projects where there's like a producer, for example, and then the artistic team is composed of male and female, so it's really difficult to decide whether it's a female creator or a male creator. But we do advise only female project and only male projects. So based on that, the numbers are not really speaking, well, they're speaking is half and half at Party. And so also Party is only specializing in artistic projects, but all fields of artistic projects is cinema, living arts, edition, and music. And there's difference between the sector, which is interesting. And same on the backers, I took a sample of a week back in October, and I was really surprised because, well, not surprised because apparently research do show that female backers support more female projects, and it shows really much. Whereas men who gives to female projects are pretty much the same rate than men giving back to men creators. But then I guess the difference is when we advise women, then they tend to, I think they're more cautious on the amount of what they're asking the crowd to give them back. But that's the only difference I saw in the numbers I sampled this morning.
Celia, do you have anything to add based on your relationship with the creators?
Yes, of course. Before answering your question, I would like to say that I'm very happy and flattered that you used an article from our site named Women in Crowdfunding as an introduction to this webinar, but it's already from 2014, and the numbers and data have changed a bit since then. So we will certainly have the opportunity to update this during this webinar. And now, as an answer to your question, it has to be said that platforms, as Alice said, don't make statistics directly on the gender of project leaders or backers. They study the first name or make cross-checks. So we have data to handle with care. It's very important to say it. On the platform Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, about half of the 26,000 projects have been initiated by women. So there is a parity in France. No, I say always in France. The same proportion is found in arts and culture projects. On Ulule, another platform, and I would like to thank the one that have entrusted me with that data, especially Ulule, which has done a great deal of work in collecting it. On Ulule, women accounted for 50% according to the 2018 impact report, and the trend continues now. However, in France in 2021, there are 32.3% of women entrepreneurs, according to InfoBref, which is an official and reliable source. So I conclude that women are overrepresented in crowdfunding in France. But beware, because not all women's projects are linked to a company. And I did not have access to precise data on cultural and art projects from the platforms, because time was short.
But maybe I'm gonna jump on the women are more cautious that Alice mentioned, which I think is interesting, because we know in some extent that men are more risk-taking or have a bigger ability to take risk, I guess. But maybe, Christian, I know that you've done research on women entrepreneurship, not just on crowdfunding. Do you see that as a general thing, or maybe it's just crowdfunding?
No, so I mean, I would say the data that I look at comes from the Danish platform. So always take that as a caveat and remember it's only specific platform. So I can only speak on base of that. But what I can say is that this data is based on self-reported data. So there people self-report as female or male, and the entrepreneurs also report it. So it's not based on this language where you basically, I think it's called Nameify, where you basically predict probabilities of one sex based on the name reported. So here it's self-reported. So we, to a certain degree, we are more sure that the gender that people report adheres to what they say, and it's not some artifact of the statistical analysis. In terms of whether females are more risk averse, I mean, if we just look at the numbers and look and held everything else constant, so yeah, we know female backers give less and give later, and we know female creators ask for lower amounts of money than as compared to their male comparisons. Now, whether that's due to internal mechanisms of risk aversion or whether it's due to structural reasons for gender inequality, I don't know. Because whether risk aversion is something that is inherent to women as compared to men, that is controversial also because inherently risk aversion depends on what your available resources are. And we know, unfortunately, women's available resources are lower as compared to men. Hence, risk aversion cannot simply be held on a straight line. But if we just look at crowdfunding, and if any of the people here are attendees and want to host a campaign, I would say if you're a female and what you're asking for is on average, your asked amount will be lower, and you will expect as a backer that females on average give less and give later. So that is kind of the only kind of clear evidence that I can find for that. So that might also be the reason why women are more successful in crowdfunding. If you last for slightly less, you are more likely to succeed. How that translates into reality, it would be interesting to see whether women experience the same success after crowdfunding. So if they ask for less, are they able to do the same with that relatively lower amount and hence still deliver on what they promise as compared to men? That's the kind of the problem with having a lot of data, is you only focus on the data you have, and then what happens after the campaign is much less clear. And I think that's more interesting, kind of like what is the results of these kind of imbalances that we observe in the data.
Thank you, Cecilia. Because you have a like personal relationship with those creators, do you see the same thinking behind the amount that women ask for compared to men, and maybe you might have some information about the project afterwards and the success rate of the project itself and not just a campaign?
Do you want to know if women?
So Christian just mentioned that
Yes.
the female backers give less and later, and mostly female creators ask for less, and are because they also have less to risk. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure for the backers, but for the other one, I know clearly, yes, the problem is more about being taken seriously as a woman entrepreneur. You have to constantly demonstrate your professionalism, your determination, and that you don't necessarily need help. This is called in French le syndrome du chevalier à la rescousse, which is not easy to translate. I think the knight to the rescue syndrome, and it is very common. And these are clearly gender prejudices and stereotypes. In France, women create smaller businesses with lower turnover, lower growth rates, and lower levels of investment. they hold less liquidity, and they are good at managing their businesses, prudent and thrifty. They have a sense of savings and prefer to borrow little. So logically, banks are less interested in them and their projects. For them, crowdfunding can be a very good solution. Let's not forget that a successful campaign often allows you to find traditional financing in a bank, for example, because the success of the campaign proves that you have a market, potential customers, and that you know how to communicate about your product and service.
Natalia, maybe do you have any information in your research based on the risk-taking abilities of women compared to men?
In our projects, we didn't look on the risk-taking part, but from the general crowdfunding literature and research that I know about, it's true. And especially in regard to female backers, it's proven in several studies that they invest less compared to the male backers. As for the reasons for it, that's difficult to speculate, as we didn't conduct research on our own in this topic. But yeah, the general trend is one, yeah.
And do we have any research based on motivations of donation? Why do people give, and if are they from friends and family circle, or as they are more as we use in the crowdfunding research society, the friends and family, and then second circle and third circle? Do we have more female in one of each? I know that the literature shows that, well, the later you give, the more likely you are in the second or the third circle. If I take what Christian said, which is women give later on in the campaign, does that mean that women are more likely to give to people they don't know at the later stage?
No, actually, it's opposite.
Okay.
The research shows that women are more eager to give to their close friends and family and to their social connections in general. So yeah, so I don't know how it connects with this investing later in the stage, but mostly it's actually known people, the people they know from before. While male investors are more eager to give based just on the rational arguments, and they can give to a large degree to people who they haven't met before.
Alice, I've seen you nod at this argument. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think like female backers, well, the rule of the three circle in crowdfunding is really, we use it every day to describe how to communicate. So when we advise like female and male creators, it's always like you have to communicate first to your first cycle. And I think as Natalia, I agree with the fact that I don't have any data for that because it's really difficult to have data. We would have to say each project and ask them, do you know this person? And then, well, continue for that. And we don't have the resources to do that. But yeah, I agree that female creators are also more eager to communicate to the first cycle more rapidly in the first stage of the campaign. So that it doesn't really surprise me that most of the female backers are from the love money circle, what we called, and men will tend to maybe give later to more projects that are attractive to them because they have a potential and reward potential as well, and are not part from the love money circle. But it's just everything is based on intuition for my part, so I don't know. But also what I wanted to say is that when we talk about like the cautiousness of women and stuff, I also observed on a daily basis that when we advise them and when we explain to them that it is possible for them to get more money, they tend to listen more and get more ambitious, I guess. Don't know if the right word of that, but I don't want to say they listen more because it's not true, but they tend to follow the counsel we gave them a bit more. And so that when we say it's all female team here in Quarty, so we encourage that as well, to be more ambitious about what they will ask for. And yeah, that's just, I wanted to nuance a bit the cautiousness part of female creators, because when we explain to them that they can go a bit more further, they do it, they listen, and they're more ambitious. So.
Cecilia, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I would like something about love money. As Alice said, it's a very important point. In general, women have a less extensive professional network than men. They often use it as a source of inspiration, a role model. Their network is more informal, and they consider their family and close friends, like spouse, friends, and colleagues, and so on, as their main asset. This is exactly what we call in communication the third circle. And it is perfect to launch a crowdfunding campaign. Conversely, men tend to consider professional relationships as assets, such as lawyers, bankers, accountants. So they are more practical. They seek contact and also experience. As a result, business networks are more accessible to men because of the positions they held before starting their campaign. But women are generally in line with crowdfunding practices. They show leadership. Their management is rather horizontal, participative, rather democratic too, interactive and open. They develop a quality relationship with their teams and with their networks, and bring a more human and social dimension to their project. Moreover, a crowdfunding campaign requires a lot of organization, and women can be very organized, as they are often used to manage two lives, simply.
Thank you. I just want to, before I ask my next question, that everyone in the audience is very much incentivized to ask questions in the comments, or we'll also have we'll have the questions at the end of the session. So like please feel free to the whole webinar, you can ask your question on the chat and we'll look at them, and at the end we'll ask them to our presenters today. So I want to come back to the fact that in general there's a lot of gender stereotypes in our societies. They can be different from culture to culture, and we know that in northern countries they seems to be better from outside. I don't know how good it is when you're actually in it, but looks better from where we are. And really I'm wondering if we can see that crowdfunding is an actual tool that makes the life of women entrepreneurs better. Is it just a replication from the traditional way of funding your projects? Or is there a difference? Is it more opportunities on the platforms and in this type of fundings and often early fundings, because most of the time those are small projects, the startup projects that then become a company or then become a full professional project. Do anyone want to start?
I mean, if I may, so I think obviously gender matters in crowdfunding success because of cultural stereotypes, because of maybe also personal factors, but we should also be careful not to make it the only thing that matters. I mean, crowdfunding is a democratizing asset, hence you get a greater diversity of people coming in. So the variability that gender can explain on its own it can explain something, yes, but it doesn't explain everything. There's a lot going on, and whether crowdfunding enables more women to garner success as compared to more traditional sources of finance, I would say without a doubt, because venture capital, even in a Danish context where we pride ourselves on equality, even though we are not performing so well anymore, there's a clear skew towards men. Women receive very little venture capital funding. So as compared to that, crowdfunding is a great asset. But how much being a woman on its own explains and whether you're successful or not, it's actually quite small. There's a lot of other stuff going on. I mean, we contain multitudes in ourselves, so it's quite difficult to say. So I would say, depending on the platform where you go, there are different ways of doing, different ways of practice, and different expectations that backers have to what they hear from. So if you go to reward, you communicate in a different way than if you go for donation, if we go to equity. So I would say that it's more important, maybe if you go in as someone who wants to achieve crowdfunder, is to understand who are the backers that use this platform. That will probably help you more in understanding the way in which you should communicate and tackle the problem, rather than this kind of binary function of whether you're a man or a woman. But I mean, obviously, this ability to mobilize your network early on is fundamental. I mean, if you don't receive funding early on in your campaign is most likely dead, because people look at what other people do. So if there's no activity early on, it becomes a sign of something negative, and then it just amplifies itself. So I think we should take it seriously, this gender attributes, but we should maybe also consider the fractionalized nature of what kind of platform we're looking at and what type of crowdfunding we're looking at.
Just jumping on that, you're mentioning that let's talk only about donation based, because that's the main way artistic and cultural projects are funded. It's very little in lending and equity. Does exist. I did my PhD on it, but very, very little. But then you also mentioned that it's based on the platform. In my experience, as I worked a little bit before my PhD in a platform, and also based on the literature, the people come on the platform because they know you, and not because they spend their time on the platform looking for projects to invest in. It might be different in crowd lending and crowd equity. Beyond on donation based, you most likely to get on the campaign because someone that you know is doing it, or someone that you you saw it on social networks, etc. So, but maybe that's a French perspective, and maybe not in Denmark or in Norway. Is there a different type of communication of how you get to a project when you're a backer? Is it really based on the platform?
I think for reward and donation, it's mostly social network based.
Yeah.
But for the other two, the investment funds, yes, and people go on the platform and search for possibilities and this kind. I don't know if you agree, Christian.
So I think you agree with, like, initially projects coming on are very heavily, the successful first time is probably heavily driven by your social network. But at least if we look at people who continue to maintain on these reward platforms, we see initially distance matters quite a lot. So we see that distance is quite predictive of where people put their money. So the closer, the better. But we also see the more times you've crowdfunded, that actually fades to the point that it doesn't matter anymore, which is quite fascinating, because that is actually the only form of finance where distance seems to diminish in what it means in importance. Because typically from an economic line of thought, you would see that, okay, distance is a risk because I don't know more about it. Hence, the longer something is away from me, the more risk is associated. But apparently within reward, it seems to be the opposite. So the more you are on this platform and the more you are there, the less risk seems to matter, or distance seems to matter, which indicates that people who do a lot of rewards start to test other things. You might start off with your friends, but then once you've had your friends' experience, then you are willing to push yourself a little further out. So I would say definitely social network matters, but there are some people who consistently do reward-based crowdfunding and then are more and more willing to support things that are further and further from themselves. And I think that is unique for crowdfunding, and that's not something you observe in other contexts, as far as I know, at least.
Cecilia, maybe you have something to add. I see you nodding.
Maybe. I will answer from the French point of view, of course. And from my own feedback with my agency from 2014. While project owners are generally young, I think 46% are under 30. Backers are older, 39% are over 50. Those who come back are often loyal to the project, as you said, but to the platform's universe too. They like and look for certain categories of projects. They have the feeling of being part of a community. At this point, it's very important for women. And women are often very compatible with crowdfunding because they are not afraid to ask for help publicly. Men are sometimes less comfortable. It's not necessarily in the education and the usual rules of society. In 2018, more women than men contributed. For example, on the Ulule platform, 56% of backers were women. Then the trend changed. Between 2020 and 2022, we were more like 49% men and 51% women. Clearly, the crisis of 2020 changed the situation. Globally, many French platforms were bought up by others. There were many concentration of platform, and in 2020, the health crisis forced backers to activate cooperation and mutual aid mechanism by massively supporting solidarity actions and activities that were in jeopardy. In France, the donation sector has increased almost threefold between 2019 and 2020. In comparison, the loans and investments sector, which is less supportive, has only increased by 1.4 times. In total, over the year 2020, according to the French cabinet Mazars, which is a famous cabinet, the participatory finances sector in France has exceeded 1 billion euros in financing. Okay, that's all.
Alice, maybe did you do you see a different way where in the way I'm going to start from that. So a crowdfunding campaign is quite it's very, very demanding in time and in effort.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people don't realize how much effort it is, because you have maybe a month, 2 months beforehand where you prepare your campaign, you prepare all the what you're going to send and all the content that you're going to share and what reward you're going to create, or what you're going to offer to your audience. And you have to create a lot in advance because it's going to take a lot of effort during And then you have like 4 to 6 weeks on average for your campaign, where you have to answer a lot of people. You have to text a lot of friends to say, like, you need to give me money right now, because you need to, you need to show that I'm a good, serious person, and you're the one who have to show that by giving me 50 euros. And then you have to create a lot of content on social media, and then you have, at the end, when you succeed, obviously you're going to succeed. When you succeed, you're going to have to send all the rewards and to send all of the thank yous, and then do your actual project.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of work. Do you see a difference in the way men and female do that work? Are women more cautious in the time and effort that it's going to take? Do they have as much time than men?
Tricky question again, because it's all intuition based on my experience here advising, like, again, creative and artists and stuff like that. But I feel, but that's just a feeling, that female creators are doing their project and prepare their crowdfunding campaign better than men. They tend to ask for a meeting like a month or two prior to the actual debut date than men. But I don't know. I really don't see a difference except from that. And then on the actual work during the campaign, and I see that a lot in the film industry and film sectors. Often I have a meeting with the producers, because they're the one who's asking for the money or looking for the money. And then during the campaign, all my interactions are with their assistant or communication manager of the company. And we know that those jobs, at least in France, I don't know in other countries, are really gendered based, especially in the living arts, again, sector. It's you have artistic directors that are often men, and then all the I don't know how to say that, the projection and administration work are really held by female, the female position. So if the intention of doing a campaign is by a man or male, then all the work of communicating, editing the media content and stuff like that is much more female based. That's my intuition on that, but I don't know.
Actually, that's a good question, because we talked about it when we had our first conversation before the webinar, and as a researcher, it's actually like a really good question. Is like, a lot of the time we tend to put a gender on the creator of the project, but who is the creator? Is it the artist behind the project? Is it the director of the company? Is it the actual person creating the content and dealing with the page? Natalia, maybe how do you treat that question? Do you just try to put it aside? Do you try to know more of who's behind the project?
As already I think was discussed here, it's sometimes difficult to find out actually when we just look on the project. If we look on the database of the projects on the platform, in many cases the gender is not actually identified there. So behind many of the projects, it's a kind of organization, company, or foundation, and then we don't actually know if it's a female or male. So only with the projects which we would interview, which we would go more in depth, then we can find out who is actually standing behind, and also what is the composition of the team, because as Alice mentioned, it's usually a team who is behind. So in most of the cases, it's not a single person creator, but a group of people, both male and females. And they're dividing these responsibilities in their own ways. And Yeah, so it's a bit difficult to say, at least if you don't go for direct contact with the project itself.
Yeah.
So sometimes in many of the research articles, they try kind of to identify it through the type of language they use, through the references to he or she you find in the text, but in many cases, it's very difficult.
I would say, for example, what we use is something called a CVR number. It's like a Danish company registry number that they have to register. And there you can basically see, I haven't looked at it, but from a statistical point of view, and it sounds, I can already feel people getting bored, but basically we cannot treat it in any other way than how many are there in each, because we have no way of weighting that, because exactly like Natalia says, we don't know. We can't interview 700 different companies and figure out how was it distributed. But I mean, there was something quite interested in the way companies presented themselves. So often when they were presented as kind of family companies, and you see who was presented on the page versus who the actual owners were, the skew was different than what was presented on the page. So what you show outward versus what is the actual ownership relationship is quite different. So I think that is maybe an ugly truth of it, is that with these family businesses where they show the family on the farm doing this thing, when you look at actual ownership, in the end, it's the male owns 75% and the rest is different banks. So he in this circumstance shows the family, but how the ownership structure actually looks like is much more complicated. It probably has something to do with that getting into details about ownership structures is probably would kill any campaign once you start, listen, it's actually set up like this. But I would say, like, who does what? And I mean, crowdfunding doesn't escape the cultural context we're in, and it doesn't suddenly democratize our whole society simply because everyone can invest. I mean, democratization is not necessarily a good thing. I mean, people, depending on where you are politically speaking, but I mean, just because it might enable a positive thing, it could also enable things that we might consider as much less likable in society as well.
Cecilia, do you see a division of the work labor as well in the project that you are helping?
Yes, I would like to add something about the time needed for a crowdfunding campaign. In my professional practice within the agency, I have noticed that women are no longer confined to so-called feminine sectors such as care, health, education, and so on. We have supported ambitious projects led by a woman or a woman and a man around technology and or sports, for example. In the opinion of the platforms, because I have asked, of course, the platforms, women are generally less ambitious in the amounts they request, and sometimes in the social recognition of their project. That's to say, their project are less flashy. There are fewer storytelling around them, and sometimes managing a campaign plus a job plus a family is very difficult if the people around you don't help, like family, spouse, close friends. But if I had to describe the strengths of women crowdfunders, it would be the way they approach their network. I mean, in general, they are not afraid to reach out to their circle of contacts, to put their project forward and to fight for it. They naturally use social networks as conversational tools like Facebook, for example. And they will therefore play the game of sharing more easily, which is a basis for communication in crowdfunding. Let's not forget that a successful crowdfunding campaign not only contributes to professional development, but also to personal fulfillment. There are often psychological barriers that come into play in a campaign. For example, fear of failure or judgment of others, fear of having your idea stolen and so on. These barriers are often very important for women, especially if they are not yet businesswomen used to navigating these environments. Crowdfunding often seems to be a more accessible gateway to their project, or even to a new life.
And so on the, I mean, you've answered somewhat, but Alice was saying that she really saw a division of workload where the director is the head, the face of the operation, but the actual person creating the content and dealing with replying to backers and doing all the communication is actually a female assistant. Do you see that also in the project that you're dealing with?
Pas spécialement, not especially, no.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think
No, it's fine. Also, I think there's also a difference of a sector, because you're not only dealing with the cultural sector, and Alice is dealing only with cultural sector. And what I can see from being a teacher in cultural sector is that 90% of my classes are just women. And so these people are destining themselves towards managing cultural projects. And so they are the main people who are behind the cultural project in the administration and managing side of the project. So that might be also a definite factor, where when we see the artistic sector, at least in France, in schools and in the artistic practice as a kid or even as adults, a lot of the artists are female. And then when we get to who's getting the fundings, who's getting the grant, who's getting published, it's a large majority of men still today, and being produced in theaters and even at the head of the theater or at the company. So there is a glass ceiling in the sector, and where the administrative work is mainly done by women. That's definitely true in the but that might not be the case in other less I don't know, people work in culture as a vocation, and they are ready to be paid less, and they are ready to do more hours because they are passionate by the subject. And so the cultural side might be somewhat of an explanation of the difference in both of your experiences.
Just one comment on this.
Yeah, sure.
When we conducted a survey here in Norway among the artists, then we find that we asked about their own evaluation of how easy for them to get funding from public grants and so on. And then actually we didn't find differences. Both male and females evaluated very similar the opportunities or the chances to get funding.
Well,
so that was very interesting.
Well, let's all move to Norway. It seems wonderful. That would be the conclusion of this talk, would be let's all move to Norway. Because I think we really have a lot to learn. Our studies on equality between genders in France in the cultural sector we're making progress every year, but it's still really bad. And the higher you get in the professional careers, it's the less women you will see. There's really a massive gender gap here. Even if in a sector where women are quite visible and are supposed to be less discriminated against. We still have 30 minutes. I was wondering if maybe in the audience we might have some questions, please, we can still talk for hours, but I'm sure if we have questions, can be from about our subject, about like
Marie?
Yes.
Before the question, sorry, is it possible to add something about the French cultural model, because it is very, very particular in crowdfunding?
Sure.
In France, the first platform67 still exists today dates from 2009. There are 67 crowdfunding platforms in France this year, which represents a large percentage of the 280 platforms counted in Europe. This is probably due to a particular cultural model and economic context. We talk about what we call the French cultural exception. This is a set of public policy measures and legislations that regulate the cultural field and therefore the cultural and creative industry. This model has some major principles that include players such as the Ministry of Culture, the National Book Center, or I don't know, the National Cinematography Center. And all of these measures have led the French people to see cultures as a separate and protected territory that is not necessarily commercial in nature. And we find this perception in crowdfunding. The French cultural model allows for a better selection of projects upstream before they are published online compared to the Anglo-Saxon model on Indiegogo or Kickstarter, for example. Moreover, the French platforms first communicated on the values shared with the public, like solidarity, sharing, transparency, and so on. In France, we have a specific word for the donors, the backers of the big platforms. For example, the donors on Ulule are the Ululeurs, and those on KissKissBankBank are the KissBankers. We can see it on Twitter. At KissKissBankBank does not exist, but at KissBankers does. We know today in marketing, for example, how language is a real weapon. Finally, regarding the economic context, the new crowdfunding regulation of November 2021 aims at European harmonization, except for donations and individual projects.
Thank you for this
cultural model.
But that allows me to jump in, and it is very interesting because in France the crowdfunding model was quite early, accepted quite early, and pretty well, like close to what the American platforms increase in democratization. So you have Kickstarter and actually Ulule and KissBankBank and my major company, who since died, but have been like quite early on the market, and French people have started using those platforms, and those two are now on the European level. And I think we talked a little bit about it, Natalia, when we talked before about the fact that the crowdfunding sector is quite new in Norway. Can you talk to us about it?
Yes, it's a growing trend, but it's not as well established as I guess in France. It started a bit later, but at the moment we see the development, which is quite amazing. I think already now for the first 3 quarters of 2022, we achieved almost 90% of volume of the whole 2021. So it's definitely growing. And the types of models that actually growing much, it's lending and equity. So it's a bit different, as I've understood from the other markets. But here it's a huge influence on lending and equity. I don't know, maybe in Denmark it's similar. And the donation and reward is a bit less popular, actually. So, but all in all, yeah, it's quite new. So people still don't know crowdfunding that well, I would expect. But in general, as we see this growing potential, we believe that the importance of crowdfunding also for cultural sector and creative sector will increase in the coming years.
Christian, can you mention the Denmark?
The Danish context. Yeah. I mean, I think the Danish crowdfunding context is comparably small, probably also because of our geographic and population size. I mean, inherently a model can only exist if there's a certain critical mass. So I think in terms of art projects, it's typically Indiegogo and Kickstarter. So that these are the places where people go to. There are some niche platforms that try to tailor it specifically to specific types of projects, but what they basically have done is they started niche, and then the ones that survive start to grow larger and larger. I would agree with Natalia's in terms of the growth of crowdfunding started with reward and donation, probably because that was what there was access to. There was Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and now it's definitely lending and equity based crowdfunding. That's especially lending. Equity is slow because that's mostly because of regulation that we have in Denmark, which is quite restrictive about that. But lending is growing enormously quickly. But here it's clear that I would say in lending there is no gender equality. It's quite clearly it's male funders and it's male backers. So in that way, we could say it's growing quickly, but the democratization that we talk about in crowdfunding is inherently not there in lending. It allows more people to engage in investment, but the bias is clearly towards men there. Whether we will see an emergence of a separate reward or donation-based art scene, I doubt it. I think the current platforms kind of serve their purpose. The only thing that we do observe is that there is a tendency to present your projects in an Americanized way or an English way. Basically, you present your campaign in English because if you present it in Danish, you go from a small market to a much bigger market. So perhaps something will emerge. There's a lot of talk about using crowdfunding as a form of alternative community support system. It remains mostly talk, because establishing a platform, setting it up, what are the barriers? What happens if we ask citizens to support public projects and those public projects don't come about? How do we ensure that is somehow fair and it's just not another form of kind of hidden taxation where rich neighborhoods will get more because there are rich people there, and poor neighborhoods where it probably serve the greatest purpose doesn't serve the purpose that it does. So I think I think the takeaway is, if you're a female entrepreneur, crowdfunding is definitely a great place to go, especially if you compare it with venture capital. But it's still not an ideal market, even in a Danish context where we say we have relative equality, because we can basically see we don't. So maybe I'm sorry, that's a little bit cynical or sad, but I mean, inherently, the 500 years of discrimination doesn't go away simply because you make a crowdfunding platform.
In Norway, we also noticed quite a large increase in local platforms during the COVID time.
Oh, great. Okay, that's because we looked at Denmark to see whether people got more locally supportive about campaigns, and we didn't actually. Everyone was talking about support local, but then when you actually look where people put their money, there was no difference between before COVID and after COVID. The money just kind of stayed. It was kind of the same spread all the way through. So maybe it's because we're a small, homogenous country, then local just means Denmark, but it's I think Norway in some ways have stronger regional kind of ties, where Denmark is kind of not flat, but yeah, okay.
In the different countries in this region, do you feel like there's more backers from like Finland and Sweden and Northern Europe in general on the Danish crowdfunding page? Because you mentioned the distance between, because Denmark is so small, the distance will not matter. But do you feel like on the on international campaign, maybe they'll have more money from the northern countries more than Southern Europe or the US?
I would say language seems to matter a lot. Like
Okay.
basically we have this Norwegian platform called Cameo, which is a lending typically for real estate, but basically they have affiliates in different countries that speak the specific language, which I think is maybe also because it's new. If you go in and something, it speaks your language, there's an inherent willingness to trust it more than going into a campaign that looks different. But I mean, uniquely, I find that the reward in Indiegogo, that there is something fascinating about people giving money to strangers and then hoping that at some point they will deliver. I mean, if we look at it from a behavioral perspective, rationally speaking, that is a very weird model. If someone sent you an email and asked you for money, you would hopefully delete the email, but because it's on a platform, we suddenly see this other dynamic, and that is why it's, at least for me, for a researcher, it's quite fascinating, because there is this willingness to trust a total stranger that in 6 months or a year I will deliver on what I promised. And I mean, that is definitely something to be hopeful about, because typically they deliver. I mean, I think we should also not underestimate that, at least in Denmark, the failure rates for crowdfunding campaigns, whether they be lending or equity or reward, are actually extraordinarily low. So that's a great sign of that we can trust strangers. It's not typically something people hear about when we talk about the internet.
By failing, you mean they actually deliver on the projects and they don't just get the campaign funded?
Yeah, or they're not able to deliver, or they default on a loan, or that the company goes bankrupt. I mean, typically we see that they do deliver. And I think that is, for people who are new to crowdfunding, there's this constant fear about, can I really trust this? From a research perspective, yes, you can, as long as it's obviously not some random crowdfunding website in a abstract context that you know nothing about. But yeah.
Alice, maybe do you have any information on the afterlife of the campaign, the success rate of the rewards? Are they actually given? And maybe is there a difference between men and women on delay, because there's always delay in crowdfunding, on delays and the life of the project?
Life, well, first of all, we have a great success rate here in Arctic, because we don't do the all or nothing thing where if you don't get, well, if you ask for 20,000 euros and you only get like 19, you don't get your money at all. So we don't do that because we know every project creators, we're able to see if the project is going to deliver or is going to be delivered. And so we give the money to the creators when they assure us the project is going to happen. So that's the thing, like we have like 95% of success rate. So it's 95% of all the projects we advise that are actually delivered at the end. So it's great. But I don't know if there's really a difference. And then there's the reward, and there's always delays, but people really understand, like it goes for male and female, I guess. People do understand that it's important, and the trust in which the act of giving to your project is put. I don't know if it's, I'm going to start that phrase again because it doesn't make sense. Giving to a project is really a trust thing as well. So it's like project creators do understand it's really important to give back the reward and to honor, in a way, what you've been telling on your campaign. And we insist on that in all the advice we do and the counsel we do. It's always like you have to thank your donators first, and then you have to send your reward, because when you'll do another campaign, and it will happen for your next project or your next movie or your next, I don't know, like theater piece or something, you will ask this person again. And if they trusted you the first time and you honored that trust, will be giving again. And so that's really important. And but I don't know if there's male and female difference in that. It's really hard to tell. But yeah, the trust thing is really important for us. And yeah, that's something we insist on during the formation of creators.
Natalia, maybe do you have any information on well, the fact that people do multiple crowdfunding like campaigns, and how do people ask for more and more? Do people are like maintain the same type of ambition? Maybe either Christian and Natalia, do you have any data on that?
We didn't study in particular. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we didn't study in particular this, but in many cases, if your first campaign is successful, it's a good indication for what you may be willing to be a serial crowdfunder. It's quite usual that you consider crowdfunding for your next project as well, because especially artistic creators, they have a series of projects and they continue this activity. So yes, but if it's a bigger amount or less, I don't have any statistics on it. And also what we see, at least some preliminary findings on the project, they show that crowdfunding is mostly considered in the starting point. When you start your artistic career, you're more eager to use crowdfunding. After a while, you also have access to more public funding, to some other commercial grants and so on. So it's a bit bigger choice you have actually after a while. But as a starting point, and I would say especially maybe even for females, even in Norway, that can be a nice starting point to launch your artistic career or to launch your entrepreneurial career. Christian.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, if we look at the probability of success, the more initially your likelihood of success, at least on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, considerably are quite low. And in Danish platforms, it's a little bit higher, but still, it's the Danish is 50-50, on Indiegogo, on Kickstarter, it's like 10 or 20%. But we see that the more basically serial entrepreneurs start to hack or find out how they tap into the crowd, maybe because, as Alice speaks, if they're successful at delivering, then the people they deliver to feel some kind of positive attachment to it. So you already have an established crowd to go to. So we see that basically you go from a failure rate of 80% to 4 campaigns later, you have nearly 100% success rate. So basically, the more you do it, the much better you get. Maybe not the big surprise. In terms of asking more, people do ask more, but there's a lot of variability in that, because sometimes people do a follow-up project, which is just some kind of attachment to the thing they did before and hence less. Sometimes it's a completely new project and then they ask more. So in terms of that, but I mean, I would say they seem to master the ability to find out what should I ask for, and are able to hit that. So I would say we should also, in terms of when people use crowdfunding, there is this notion that crowdfunding is a last resort. And at least with the interview, we've done some interviews, at least in Denmark, with 20 entrepreneurs that did that. And there was only one who expressed it as a last resort. Others actually express it as a first resort. So, and I also do, especially with reward, they see it not just as a source of finance, as a research perspective, we see it as a financial mechanism. But when we asked them what it was about, it was saying, oh, I'm testing a market, or I'm marketing idea, or I'm trying something new and see whether people like it. So basically it's not, I need money, please give it to me. It's more, here's this cool idea, do you believe in this cool idea, or I'm trying to market something. And that might come down to, from a research perspective, we don't measure it like that. We just measure, do you hit your funding goal or not, and then we say it was successful. But if it's simply to testing ideas, reward is a perfect context to test out new ideas and see if it works. If it doesn't work, then you get feedback on it, and if it works, fantastic. So I think we should be careful about treating crowdfunding as just a financial tool. There are many other ways of looking at it.
We have a question from the room, which I guess is more targeted to Natalia and Cecilia. Do you have any data about specific French Norwegian or Norwegian French cultural projects? Any preferred platforms? You mentioned KissKissBankBank and Ulule as the French, and Indiegogo and Kickstarter as a Scandinavian. And does CAP support this kind of campaigns? So I guess we have some French Norwegian campaign projects in construction, and so do you have any advice for them?
Oui, je vais répondre en français. Ça dépend où sont les cibles de la campagne. Là où sont les cibles, on y va.
So I'll translate it depends on where the target is. So your audience will matter more, and you need to be where your audience is. Is that a good translation?
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, we don't have any example, at least which we interviewed or studied in particular, but I agree that with Cecilia that the choice of platform depends on where your fans or where your audience, your potential backers are, and also the language. Again, if you go for French platforms, then it's mostly for French-speaking audience. Go for Norwegian local platforms, and of course also if you go for Kickstarter, which is more global ones, then you maybe can address both. But again, you need to decide if this proximity effect matters. If you really want to connect to Norwegian or French audience, maybe local platforms can be a good choice as well.
I will also give somewhat of an answer. The choice of the platforms depends on which one you're comfortable with and align with your values, but it also depends on the so you have somewhat of a indication based on the success rate. So we've seen that in ProArty they have a 95% success rate. Last time I checked on Ulule, it was maybe like 70% around that success rate. But on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, the success rate is way lower because they don't have any. They let everyone in. Most French platform will look at a project and say, well, you're asking too much, you're asking too little, and give some advice on how to present the project. And so those you will be helped by those platforms because they want you to succeed, because they have a lot of projects, but they also need all those projects to succeed, to survive. And Kickstarter and Indiegogo have more of a quantity over quality type of strategy. So they rely everyone, and they don't have any really help when you're on the back end of the platform. And so the choice of the platform would be, I guess, also in this depends on how comfortable you are doing your campaign alone, or you can hire an agency like CAP.
Thank you. J'ajouterais que Kickstarter ou Indiegogo n'ont pas un code, c'est-à-dire un logiciel multilingue prévu pour 2 langues. C'est prévu pour être utilisé en anglais, alors que d'autres plateformes sont multilingues, jusqu'à 18 langues sont possibles.
So it also depends on the ability of the platform to be coded in multiple languages, and so some platform will allow you to only have one language, English, and other are already made to be used in different countries, and so you can have your project available in different languages, but have with the main page, but in different languages, which is a lot easier when you want to, I guess, have your project in different countries. as Christian said, the language barrier is very important.
Et c'est très important aussi pour le référencement naturel.
And it's also very, very important for the referencement on Google, I guess, like to be able to find your project online. Alice, maybe do you have any advice on why people should choose ProArty instead of another platform?
Advertising time. Well, like as you and Cecilia said, really depends on the audience. We're really little team with no financial meanings. So, for example, our platform is not developed in English or is not multilingual. So, well, we find like System D to make it bilingual on the page and etc. But it's not ideal, and we know that. But then we have competitive assets as well. For example, our platform is held by an endowment fund. So it allows people, when they give their party, to get tax reduction. So that's an incentive for both the creators and the backers. Because in France, the incentive, like the tax incentives, are quite high. It's 66% you get back from your donation. And so, for example, in cultural projects, that is really big, and that's our main assets compared to the big Ulule and KissKiss, where we cannot compare because it's more, they're huge compared to us, but then they don't allow that. So it depends on the nature of the project. It depends on the audience. It depends on, yeah, exactly as you said, Marie, if you want to do your campaign alone because you're okay with that, or you wish more advice on that, in ProArty, that's our second name. Characteristic is that we accompany every single person that wants to launch a campaign with us. We organize meetings and we counsel them for about an hour project. So that's also why we only have like 300 projects per year, compared to Ulule and KissKiss with thousands of projects. But then it depends on what you want or on what you feel most comfortable with. Yeah.
And Natalia and Christian, do you have anything to add on the choice of a platform or like a strategy?
I think also a bit dependent on the industry, because even in the creative industries, you have difference between more core creative industries and more wider industries. For example, for games, for design, they're more global in their nature. So the global platforms can be more suitable, while for theater, performing arts, literature, the language is important, so maybe more suited to the local platforms.
I was wondering because indeed, Alice mentioned it in France for cultural donation. Well, not all cultural enterprise can give this reçu fiscal, which is the way you can get a tax receipt from your donation. Does that exist in Norway or Denmark? And is there? Nope.
Not as far as I know, at least. But I think you pay. Maybe you can put it afterwards on your tax scheme, but I don't think it's automatically connected to the platform.
So for equity and lending, it's automatically, but that's basically because they want you to pay taxes. It's not because they want to give you taxes back. So I mean, there you go. I'm actually interested in, Alice, do you have any insights on how many people actually employ these tax rebates? Like, is it particularly big?
So because it's really specific to ProArty as well. Most of our projects are open to this tax reduction, meaning like when I give to a project, I can either get a tax receipt or not if the project is not eligible to mecenas sponsorship. But how many people uses this tax receipt, I don't know.
Okay.
The only thing I know is that when the campaign are open to tax reduction, like 95% of the donation are made to get that tax receipt.
So sorry. So before there was a time where there wasn't this, and then when you implemented it, you saw.
No, it was always like that. But
Okay.
on the platform, there is projects that are open to tax reduction and
Oh,
projects
okay,
that
yeah,
are
yeah.
not open to tax reduction. And on project, so we have data on that because it's our main competitive like things. On projects that are open to tax reduction, like 95% of the backers are asking for the tax.
For it. Okay. Because there's no cost in not asking. Yeah.
There's no cost. And even when I do donation on Party, even if it's a little amount of donation, if it's like maybe 100 or even 50 euros, which is little, I ask for it because it pays nothing to ask for it. And then after, it's really easy. You just indicate on your tax scheme that you donated 100 euros to Party, and automatically, it's like the French fiscal system, like les impôts are not connected to our platform, but then it's really easy. And
I think a lot of people use it.
Yeah, I do think that. And then it's so it's really an incentive because the backers tend to give 3 times more than they usually plan to give when they see it's.
But they get 60. That's okay. Yeah.
So the average donation is 3 times more than the average donation on a project that is not open to tax reduction.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's just
but it's a very important scheme. In my PhD, I was studying only project creating that museum, and so they all give these tax deduction receipts, and at the time the average amount for donation on the platform, a normal project, no tax deduction, was 50 euros. And on my project, it was about 150 euros.
Yeah.
So that's about
always the case.
So people just they are able to give this. They give in average the same, but the state give twice what they gave. Basically, that's how it works, and it's a very well because it's the case for all charitable donation. So people are very used to the system, so they know what it is and they know how to use it. I think. So.
But then use a French platform because that doesn't at least in the Danish one that doesn't exist. So I mean that there's that incentive in itself. Sounds quite convincing to me.
But it's not for the crowdfunding. It's for all fundraising.
But still, like if you have to choose a Norwegian or a platform or French.
But that's also just a way for the government to give less, themselves. So it's a two-way street. But the only thing is that when you have this tax receipt, you can have reward, but it can be only 20% of the amount that you gave. So if you give 100 euros, you have a tax receipt of 66 euros, and then you can get a reward that is actually worth 20 euros, with the difficulty of defining the worth of this reward. Like if it's a book, if it's something that you will put in like in on the market, then you have to kind of know how much it is. But sometimes if it's like a breakfast with the creator, or like, it's hard to know how much that's worth. And that's a problem for all type of, like, it's the same for a museum when they have those tax receipts. You have to define what is worth the reward.
What a bureaucratic mess. Okay.
I mean, you don't have to you don't have to declare it.
But it's just it's wild, like 66%, but then 20% of the expected. No, sorry, this is beyond the scope.
It's supposed to be a philanthropic.
Exactly. No, exactly. And then you incentivize it, and this is still
So French.
The main goal is to avoid having people just buy stuff and make the state pay for what they just bought.
Makes sense. Yeah, get a nice couch or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's interesting to see the difference in cultural policies. I don't know if there's any more question. I don't think there's any more question, and I think we've got to the end of our time. I don't know if you want to add anything, any closure, any conclusion, last words. Nope.
Yes, I have one conclusion from my point of view. Crowdfunding is not really a revolutionary agent for women in the economy, but rather, I would say, a facilitator. This observation is double-edged. On the one hand, crowdfunding allows women to activate their network, to have visibility, and give them self-confidence. And on the other hand, crowdfunding for both men and women tends to replace traditional finance, which takes fewer and fewer risks, particularly for companies that earn little. And these are the same businesses with high human value that make up the majority of business startups led by women. So it seems to me very important to put into perspective the contribution of crowdfunding to the general economy and to consider it as one element, obviously important, of global trends. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Then I will conclude that we should all move to Norway. That should be the main conclusion. And really thank you for your time. I hope everyone in the audience was convinced by our presentations. And I hope we keep in touch and have more conversation in the future.
Yeah.
It'd be wonderful.
Thank
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you for the invitation.
Okay.